This experience took place for many years in my life. My first time experiencing this event took place back at my old house when I was 11 years old. I just remember waking up dead, scared out of my mind. Just waking up from a black sleep. No recollection of a bad dream or anything. I was just terrified, heart thumping, and cold sweats running down my neck. I was asleep, facing the wall, so I turned around and looked at the time. 3 a.m. Eventually, I fell back asleep. That would happen every time. Sometimes every day, and other times 2 to 3 times a week. Always the same. Wake up scared, turning around and it's 3 a.m., and falling back asleep. After a month is when it started to get strange and change. I would be in a deep sleep, sometime even woken up from a good dream. I would wake up and sense something or someone in my room with me. That can't happen, since the other people who lived with me was my sister and her husband. Plus, I slept with my door locked. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move or breathe. I would open my eyes and look around to see nothing but the light and shadows caused by my night light. Nothing in sight, but I was terrified. I would end up falling asleep after an hour or so. I started middle school and struggled with sleep deprivation. Sleeping in class, the experience was still there, but happened about once a week, but I didn't fall asleep after. I would stay up, but still felt the presence of another in my room, sitting somewhere in the shadows. I just turned 15, and I haven't had this experience in weeks. It was 8th grade prom, and me and my girlfriend decided that she wanted to spend the night with me. We were both asleep in my bed, but my eyes opened up to someone turning on my light switch. I couldn't breathe, and it felt like someone was sitting on my chest. My eyes twitched from side to side, trying to see what's going on. I couldn't move or scream. I just remember my ex-girlfriend's hand in my hand. I was squeezing her hand, trying to get her attention, with no reaction. I began to look around and I noticed a spiky human-like shadow creeping towards me from my closet a few feet away. I couldn't do anything but watch this ghost approach me. I just remember the terror I felt that night. Blood, cold, disastrous fear. It got closer, and within a few seconds it was on top of me, face to face with an empty shadow. The physical pain I felt was crazy. While the shadow was on top of my chest, I opened my eyes to see the thing look up towards my locked door and jump up. The thing gets up and goes flying through the door. It was like it was startled and wanted to see what was going on. After that night, it all stopped. No more 3 a.m. random wake-ups anymore. No more sleep paralysis. And best of all, no more ghosts or shadows. I can't quite explain this experience, but even to this day, it still gives me goosebumps all over my body thinking about it. Have any of you ever experienced something similar to this? I'd love to hear about it. This is my first time telling this story since it happened. A few years back, my friends Jess, Gabe, and I took a hike in a secluded area we weren't familiar with. I was 16 at the time, Jeff was 18, and Gabe was 19. We were all into photography, so we were hoping to get to the top of the mountain just as the sun was setting to get some good shots. We turned on some music and generally just relaxed on the way up. We saw a few groups of people on the way up, all of which warned us to get off the mountain before dusk, as bears and mountain lions were prominent in the area. We didn't take them too seriously and continued up the mountain until we'd reached the summit and got our pictures. They didn't turn out all that great, and since the trail was a loop, we decided to follow the loop in hopes of getting a better angle. What we didn't realize was that the loop was several miles long, and it would take us beyond nightfall to get back down. By the time we realized our mistake, it was way too late. We were in the middle of Colorado wilderness, but had nothing to guide us but our phone flashlights. Eventually, My speaker died, and as it did, all three of us immediately noticed how bizarre, almost surreal the silence was. At this point, we are more than just a little freaked out, and decided to hold on to the small pocket knife that I had been carrying. I carried it in my fist in an attempt to comfort myself. The silence was short-lived and was broken within minutes by the sound of heavy boots on gravel. A figure appeared over the hill. As it came closer, I noticed a few odd things about what at the time I thought was a man. He was walking in the pitch black with no source of light. He had a black bandana covering his lower face. And now he was walking very slowly and deliberately. As he passed, I muttered inaudibly nervous, "Hey." He never responded, nor did he even glance in our direction. The night air was chilly, but I swore I felt it drop a few degrees when he was near. We picked up our pace and did not dare to look back for several minutes. By the time we worked up the courage, he was already gone. We tried to explain it to each other to try to comfort ourselves, but we all knew that it wasn't that simple. By the time we were getting close to the bottom of the mountain, we had calmed down a bit, but that didn't last long either. When we got to the parking lot, there was only one car there, and it was ours, meaning there was no way anyone else was up that mountain. We left in a rush, and still, to this day, I get goosebumps thinking about that whole ordeal. Let me start by saying I'm a 20-year Army veteran, having enlisted in the late 80s. For the most part, I have been trying to come to terms with what happened to me, only to be unable to come to any comprehension. Let me start at the beginning of what has haunted me for the last 15 years. In the mid-late 90s, I was deployed in the Balkans. The Bosnian conflict was winding down, and the things were trying to normalize in the region. My unit was assigned to a group of UN investigators who were looking to verify accounts of war crimes that have taken place during the conflict itself. We were joined by a group of British soldiers who, like my unit, would act as security and protective detail for the investigators. For the first 5 weeks or so, things progressed normally. Well, as normal as can be expected from a war-torn country. On the third day of week 6, we received information that a small village nestled in the high country in the shadows of Vlasic Peak. We mounted up and prepared for a 4-vehicle convoy to move out. As we drove on, the atmosphere was calm and we were talking animatedly about our cars. The lead vehicle took a slow turn onto a heavily rutted and pockmarked road off the main road we had been traveling. Almost instantly, the air felt dense, oppressive, for lack of a better word, as our talk changed to what would soon have to deal with. Having seen the desperation and despair those who unfortunately lived here had to deal with, we tried very hard to be sympathetic to their plight by not being as boisterous as we had moments before. As we made our way down the road, the entire area became eerily silent. Cold and very uncomfortable. An odd feeling for the middle of the summer season. We crested a slight hill and turned south when the village came into view. My first thought was these poor folks had been through hell. I couldn't fathom at the time how true that was. We rode into the village at a slow speed, each of us suddenly very edgy. The village, for all intents and purposes, appeared to be deserted. Not a single soul in sight. This was nothing new to us, as civilian population had a tendency to hide whenever armed men suddenly appeared among them. This time was different though. As we disembarked our vehicles, we took up a defensive posture waiting for orders to see what we could do next. It was soon decided that we should search the village for anyone who may be there. We all had the unmistakable feeling of being watched. As we split up into 4-man teams and started our search, a loud, blood-curdling scream rang out. It grew in both volume and intensity, as it was coming from every direction. We all took cover behind various positions, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. The wind had picked up significantly, growing with the same intensity of the screaming. It was so loud, we had resorted to hand signals to communicate. We decided to pull back to alleviate the fear of the civilians, who we thought were terrified by our presence. We ran for our vehicles loaded up and started backing out of the village, scanning every door, window, and shadow and tree line. Several of the others started calling out movement in the village from different positions, though they couldn't articulate what they saw. All they knew is they were sure they saw movement. We stopped again and took up a defensive posture. We all had the same thought: ambush. As both the wind and screams grew, our CEO got on the radio and called for reinforcements, thinking we were about to be engaged by whoever this fucking was. This is where things started to get really creepy. The screams morphed into bassy, low growls. Then began speaking in a language none of us understood, yelling at us. Our CEO, a man I'll call Adams, immediately ordered us to get back in the vehicles and get the fuck out of there. As we tore ass out of the village, heading back towards the main road, the lead vehicle came to a halting stop. We were about a half mile from the village when a sergeant in the lead vehicle started yelling for Adams to come up there. Adams ordered us to watch the rear and our flanks before I saw him leap out of the vehicle in front of me. He ran forward and was gone for several minutes before coming back into view, yelling for me to follow the other vehicles and to not stop for anyone or anything. As he had done into this vehicle, he peeled out, cutting hard to the right, leaving rooster tails and dirt mike rocks from the soft shoulder. As I followed his lead, I glanced to the left to see what obstructed the road. Something I regretted doing. Placed across the road in a row were severed heads of approximately 70 people, men, women, and children. I could hear Adams screaming over the radio to command, relaying that we had seen and drove for several miles before stopping to meet up with 2 platoons that had been sent to our side. Adams got out and spoke with the officers in charge, and it was agreed that the investigators and several men would get the hell out of there, while the rest of us would go back and engage the enemy. Air support was en route, and would be there momentarily. So as we turned around and drove back towards the village, Adams relayed exactly what positions we would take up. We stopped just shy of where we had the encounter. We stopped just shy of where we encountered the decapitated heads. We all got out of our vehicles, took our positions, and waited for further orders. We were soon moving forward on foot with 3 Humvees, with mounted 50s, slowly following our lead. When we got to where the heads had been, we all stopped. There was nothing there. No physical evidence of anything having been there. No severed heads, no blood, nothing other than our tracks in the soft shoulder. Adams and the other 2 officers began to argue when someone called out in the tree line. Everyone peered into the trees, our weapons all at ready high, preparing for a firefight. There was a sudden maniacal laughter, taunting, and cruel nature. Then we saw them. 2 glowing red eyes, just staring at us. Then they vanished after a few moments. To say we were scared shitless was an understatement. Just as we were about to get the hell out of there, 2 hellos slide over us. The fast tropes dropped both sides at 2 Hueys, a group of about 20 men, all dressed in black utilities and very heavily armed. All but 3 of them went straight to the tree line and disappeared into the bush. The 3 who stayed behind walked over to Adams and the 2 other officers. They carried an air of authority with them as they called us up from the officers. After a brief summary of what happened, the one who seemed to be in command ordered the 2 reinforcement officers to take their men and the 3 Humvees back to the main road and await for our return. He then looked pointedly at the other 2. One I can only describe as a monster of a man who stood well over 6 feet tall. He was shouldered with obvious huge muscles, and the other 6-foot Native American before turning us back. I watched as the two walked several circles around the area we had pointed at having severed heads. I could hear one talking to us about examining the road, and it captured my full attention. They seemed to be smelling the road and surrounding area, almost a way to a bloodhound would. This was really weird. The tall one, with Slavic features, whistled as their commander turned to face him and give him a thumbs up. The commander told us to follow him, and he proceeded to walk over to the other two who fell in beside him, and they continued up the road towards the village. Don't go near the spot you said those heads were. Keep up. He didn't even turn around. He just kept walking. None of us wanted to get involved with whatever was back there, but these guys would not take no for an answer, and had in fact threatened to shoot any of us if we didn't do exactly what he said. By the time we reached the village, the civilian's body had been placed side by side in front of a building. The rest of the strange unit was moving through the village in odd formations, swerving this way and that, until they would charge in again. As we were telling him, a large convoy pulled up, and many men dressed in fatigue started assembling, while a British two-star shouted orders, while several people wearing only what I can describe as hazmat suits, moving towards the bodies of the villagers. The two-star walked over and just stood behind the guy we were talking to. Once we had told him everything and they were going over it several times, we dismissed it, and we were told to go back and to say nothing of this event. I thought that odd. Not the encounter, but the event in itself. I don't know about the others, but I have never spoke of what happened. Life for me returned to normal, yet always in the back of my mind lingered what I experienced. A few years later, we were just starting the invasion of Iraq. While on deployment, I bumped into new Colonel Adams. He spoke briefly about parting ways, just before I moved to place his hands on my shoulder, and he said, "Have you said anything to anyone?" I knew exactly what he was talking about. I shook my head to affirm a negative. That's very wise of you, Gunny. Some of the others weren't as bright and unfortunately met an untimely demise. Keep that in mind, Gunny. A lot can happen in a war zone. The smile he gave me was so menacing and feral that I barely slept from that day on. I looked up Adams and the few others I could remember from this event. I learned Adams had died 3 years ago and did no further digging. I retired from the Army after my enlistment was up. Though my CEO asked me to re-up. Quite adamantly, I refused, got shipped back to the States, and fell completely off the grid. I now live in a quiet cabin in the mountains. I go to town for supplies, but don't talk much to anyone, because honestly, I don't know who I am really talking to. For the past 10 years or so, I've been having some dreams that partially or totally end up happening in real life. At first, they were silly, trivial things. The first one I had was back in early 2007. I was just finishing up middle school, and my sisters and I were semi-obsessed with Disney Channel shows. My dream was a harmless, hanging out with celebrities dream. That particular dream featured the Sprouse twins from That Sweet Life. In the dream, I walked into a room where they were wearing fake muscle suits, one in red and one in blue, and flexing in the mirror. I was confused and asked, "What are you guys doing?" And they whirled around quickly and said, "Nothing." A couple of months or so later, an episode came out where they became superheroes in red and blue muscle suits. Unfortunately, I hadn't taken down to writing down my dreams until after this incident, so I don't have any proof that I dreamt it before it happened. Another one was a vague dream about spending the day with a guy, walking around, talking, and having fun. I didn't remember his face when I woke up, but I remembered his hair. He had a very pronounced cowlick at his forehead, and how it felt to hug him at the end, and how it felt all real. Literally 2 or 3 months later, I ran into a friend of mine at a local amusement park. We were both there for school field trips, but for completely different purposes, and from schools 3 hours apart. I ended up hanging out with him for the whole trip until I had to leave. When I hugged him goodbye, my dream flashed into my mind. This trip was exactly the same as my dream, down to his hair and the hug. On the bus ride home, I stared out the window in shock. This one is documented in my journals, and I still get goosebumps when I think of it. The dream took a turn for the unexpectedly dark sometime later. My sisters, Michelle and Lizzie, and I made friends with 2 English kids through a writing website Lizzie and I used. These 2 kids were really goofy and funny, and after talking with them for a while, they told us that one of them, I'll call Mike, had a cancer that was in remission. A while later, they revealed that his cancer was back, but Mike was going in for treatment again. Cue the dream. I dreamt that my sister and I went to visit them across the pond. I hung back with Mike's mom while everyone else played in the yard. I asked her about Mike, how he was doing. Quietly, she told me that this time, the cancer was terminal. He wouldn't make it. We got the same news in real life a couple of months after that. He and Lizzie were really good friends, and she took it hard. I think she still writes Dear Mike at the beginning of her journal entries, and it's been almost 6 years. I start to recognize the dreams that are potentially real, and I had one 2 nights ago. In the dream, a friend of mine was crying. At first I didn't know why. She didn't tell me. But then I realized her baby bump was gone. She had lost her child. I hugged her tightly for a long time before I woke up. Right now, my friend is 5 months pregnant and due in July. I'm praying that I'm wrong about this dream. Does anybody else ever dream things and then they become real? I can't be the only one that's ever had this experience. They don't call things deja vu for no reason, right? This experience happened back in the fall of 2015. I've had many unexplainable experiences, but this one stands out more than the others. I'm a casino games dealer for an organization that I don't think I can name. One weekend, one of our sister casino sites had a big poker tournament to which they brought in dealers from other casinos under the organization. It was a 2-day tournament. During the second day, they were courteous enough to let out the out-of-town dealers early, as the amount of players and dealers needed to dwindle down anyway. I traveled in with my own vehicle, as my mother lived relatively close to the site, and I stayed the weekend with her. I had been dealing for 5 hours. Not straight, we had breaks, and I was told to sign out as I was done. Not even a thank you or a goodbye. But I was happy I finally got to go home. I began my 2-hour trip, all the way back to my city. I arrived home and entered my apartment and rushed up to my suite. I live in a 3-bedroom apartment with my girlfriend, still to this day. I know a 3-bedroom for the 2 of us is a bit big, but I have my own gaming room and a spare bedroom with a bed for guests, so it's really handy. When you walk into the apartment, the kitchen is on the right, and further in is the living room. The left is the hallway. All 3 bedrooms are on the right of the hallway, with the bathroom at the end on the left and the master bedroom right across. The closest 2-bedroom entrances are right next to each other. The spare bedroom has a door facing the hallway, and my gaming room door is just to the right of it. I threw my bag down on our spare computer chair and dealer uniforms on the bed in the spare bedroom. I took my jacket off and threw it on the bed as well. I was too lazy for my trip to unpack right away and was having a nicotine fit and decided to do it later. I went to my gaming room and sat on my computer chair and lit a cigarette. Happy to be home after a long weekend. I pushed the power switch on my computer and turned on my monitor and swiveled my chair back to my cigarette. Just as I grabbed my cigarette, I noticed a shadow moving against a wall and disappearing in my hallway, blocking out the light from the spare bedroom, and a loud thud coming from that room. I haven't felt my heart sink that low since I was younger, when I had another unexplained experience. My first thought was, There was someone in my apartment. Maybe I should call 911. I grabbed my cell phone and I yelled out, "Whoever is here, come out. I promise I won't hurt you." My voice was shaking like a teenager, asking at a girl. Now I'm 6'4", 250 pounds and don't scare easily. But when you caught me off guard like that, it's pretty hard to be brave. There was no response. I slowly walked towards the door. There was no sight of movement and nothing had come out of the spare room as I had my eyes focused on the hallway the whole time. I thought to myself, if this is my girlfriend playing a prank, I'll probably hit her with the pool cue anyway for messing with me. Jokingly, I tried to ease myself. It didn't work. I could feel my palms sweating around the pool cue. I peeked around the corner and into the spare room. There was nothing there. I pushed the door back to check if anyone was behind it. I hit the door stopper with a thud. The same loud thud I heard when I saw the silhouette, but quieter. One mystery solved. I knew what the source of the thud was, but this didn't make the anxiety go away. If anything, it heightened it. I rushed into the spare room and looked to my left, ready to swing. Nothing there. The room was empty. I grabbed my phone from my pocket. One message. I read it. It was my girlfriend and she said, "Hey babe, hope you made it home safe. Work is going by slow. Can't wait to see you at midnight. Love you." I locked the screen, trying to figure out what was happening. I knew what I had to do. I swept every inch of the apartment, every closet, behind every door, and made sure that the door was still locked and no one made it out. The door was locked. The last-ditch check after I checked the whole apartment, the balcony sliding door. I checked. The wooden stop was in the slide and there was no way anyone could make it in. I stood in the living room, pool cue stew in hand. My brain trying to process this whole situation. Wind, maybe changing air pressure. No. The windows, they weren't open. It's fog cold. As I was processing, another thud comes from the hallway again. I make my way over to the spare back room door, and the door is still moving. I grabbed my vehicle keys and bailed. All prior home sweet home thoughts going out the window. I drove and grabbed a burger and drink from the drive-thru. I sat in the parking lot with my vehicle and at the fast food joint just eating, but I couldn't get much of it down since I wasn't hungry, but a neat excuse to be out of the apartment. I sat there and tried to process what happened in peace. Maybe the door hinges are too well lubricated and changing air pressure is causing the door to hit the stopper. Now, ordinarily, that would have been my explanation. Horrible explanation, but I couldn't come up with anything that made sense for the silhouette. That damn shadow on the wall. Like someone standing in the room, blocking the light, casting a shadow on the hallway. I sat in the parking lot for an hour. Finally, I got hungry and ate what I had. The unhealthy fast food refilling my courage to return home. Everything was normal when I returned home. I was on edge, but nothing happened that night. Midnight approached and I picked up my girlfriend from work. She asked how my weekend was and if I enjoyed the food she cooked. I explained what happened and that I ignored her delicious home cooking for a fast food burger. She just nodded her head and said, "Yeah, I know. There's something in our apartment. It doesn't seem to like me. Pretty sure it's scared of me." It kind of surprised me. I chuckled. "Yeah, you're pretty mean." She hit my arm playfully. Shortly after we cleansed the apartment, everything seemed to settle down after that. To this day, we sometimes hear voices. Cupboard doors bouncing like they open slightly and let go, or dishes clinking in the cupboard, but nothing we can't handle. At least, there's no more shadows slamming doors.